evening, folks, and welcome to the show. Later on in the show, I'll have Joe Patterson, who set up the Business Rate Union of Ireland. But first, I'm talking to a man who's probably better known as a lay litigant in the country, and we'll explain what that is. Tom Darcy. Tom Darcy, you're very welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Ben.
Tom, tell me this about yourself. I know you were through the ringer in the courts in your own personal capacity before you actually started helping people like myself, the length and breadth of the country. Tom, tell me, where did things go wrong? I know you had a taxi business and a coal business and a building business. You seem to be stifled by government at every step of the way. Give us just a short brief of where it all started and went wrong.
Well, like everybody, I suppose when I got married at 18, I was in the family coal business. And of course, the government, they introduced restrictions in relation to smokeless fuel.
Yeah.
So very quickly, I was out of business.
Okay. That wasn't particularly a bad thing. I know for you it was, but most people would say, well, that was kind of a good thing. I remember the old smog days in the city where you could see the old aerials that we used to have as a kid. But then you set up a fairly successful taxi business, Tom.
I did. Obviously, I was 21 at that stage, and I moved into the taxi business. And with such an investment, I seen that there was blatant abuse by the government in relation to the inequality being perpetrated against the taxi industry. So with the help of a very good and late friend of mine, Terry Rogers, we established the National Taxi Drivers Union of Ireland. And sadly, that didn't, well, at least my participation was very quickly ended.
Yeah.
And sadly, the taxi industry was deregulated.
Right.
Which led something similar to what we're seeing right now. A lot of people who invested dearly, who have lost their business, most who had invested either lost their families or their relationships, and some sadly took their own lives.
Yeah, and it'd be fair to say a lot of people would have invested heavily. You know, I know some taxi men who took out mortgages just to pay for a taxi plate, and overnight these taxi businesses were worthless, basically worthless, and they still left with a mortgage to pay for a plate that was now, at best, €5,000.
Well, again, it relates to, I suppose, the retardation of the Irish government's failure back then as now. They failed to extend an economical or environmental or social evaluation to the taxi industry. They just acted because Dublin Bus, Erden Road Erden, weren't supplying a public service.
That's right. Yeah.
And yet, the taxi industry, because they were buying licenses, that was a private investment for a public service.
Yeah.
Which was, there's almost an ordinary in that. But moving on, again, it shows the lack of interest the government had even back then to the ordinary person.
Yeah, that's right.
And now, after the taxi industry basically was destroyed by the government, it would have to be said at the time, my wife and myself, my wife went to college, she qualified as an interior designer, and I entered into the building industry.
Yeah.
And of course, for those that know me, the rest is history. But
Yeah.
for those that don't know me, I, like them, like every person looking at this today, we broke no laws and we committed no crimes when we went in to borrow money.
Yeah.
We considered that that bank was licensed, it was solvent, it was acting within accordance to the laws of this country.
And regulated.
And one would say, obviously, regulated, but the reality was that they weren't. And if I knew back then where I know now, I would feel far safer going to the corner of a street to a moneylender, unlicensed, and borrowing money, because at least I would know what I was getting into.
And of course, the moneylender at the corner of the street didn't pretend to be anything else, so you knew who you were dealing with.
Well, of course, and again, there's so many complications, and this is my first opportunity, and I'd like to thank you for extending it, to explain in simple terms the criminality that has been perpetrated on the taxpayers of this country.
Yeah.
And it's seen something that has been muted and covered up for a long time.
Yeah.
And
well, of course, that's the idea of this actual show, is to give ordinary people a voice to say what it is they want to say, because Irish media, as you say, does cover up, does quell, any sort of real story. Tom, you were on RTE. I know they gave a little clip to you, and they always cut out the best bits, so we'll get into them in a moment. But I know you were, what was it? You had a funny comment about Countess Markovic. Maybe you'd explain that to us, because we always like a bit of humour as well, don't we, Tom? We don't take ourselves too serious.
No. Well, again, I had been campaigning and investigating and unearthing corruption and documentation, and I wanted to produce this to RTE. And on that day, outside the Allsops auction, which a group of like-minded people, we prevented homes being sold. And we have continued on from that. But the interview was outside. I had the documentation to substantiate everything I was saying. There was no way it could be argued. I have government documentation that our banks were insolvent yet trading. And they mentioned a comment in relation to the anti-English comments that were made inside the Allsops auction. And I made a reference to Constant Markovic. What I meant to say was that Michael Mallon and herself were there across in Stephen's Green, and that he was assassinated. But of course, nerves and everything else, my first time in a camera, and I got the gender wrong. Now, one would expect a professional editor to recognize that immediately and to put in the substantial issues of criminality. But I've always been thankful for that mistake, because it's given me from having no recognition. And I think it had an adverse effect to what they were trying to create. I went to being known and having over 60,000 hits, and then automatically people wanted to know what other mistakes I must have making. But then they started to Google me.
That's right.
And they could see, statements I made outside the Supreme Court in Ireland in relation to violations against ordinary citizens, ordinary families. And this is all about ordinary people. It's nothing whatsoever got to do with that old chestnut argument of developers destroying the industry or destroying the economy. Nobody looking at this today broke any laws or committed any crimes.
That's right. So what RTE tried to do, as you say, a professional broadcaster would have cut a little mistake out. They tried to really say, here's a half-baked loon because he thinks Countess Markovic is a man, but inevitably they basically shot themselves in the foot, because you shot to stardom, if you like, because of the mistake rather than the substantial message. So let's go back to the message, Tom. You talked about the bank. A lot of people watching this evening and during the week on this show will be interested, because so many people in this country are in trouble, ashamed, don't know what to do, in many cases suicidal. And we are talking about a bank who has committed criminal acts. And you and I know, Tom, that coming to court in equity courts, one must come with clean hands. The others may not understand that. So can we talk a little bit about the criminality and the precise moment of criminality, and maybe some of the laws that you and I feel were breached, to say the least?
Again, using my own experience, and it can be quite easily substantiated by any reporter watching this program. Most people, when they went in to borrow money for a mortgage, they considered that it was a license regulated entity. Cool. And of course, they had all the security of that. And when they went in and signed a loan offer, then things changed, but they weren't made aware of it. And sadly, this is universal throughout the world, not only in Ireland, but universally. It happened in every country. That loan offer was turned into a promissory note. And that promissory note was then sold on. And most, particularly if you had a 20 or 30 year or 40-year term, that became 300, 400, 500 times percent the value. And that was given back to the bank. So but that in itself, Tom, am I right in saying, is not illegal though? It is not illegal on two issues. Firstly, if you are made aware of it, which most people, if not all people, when you're given a documentation of 11 or 12 pages and you sign where the post-it says it to sign. You don't read, nor would you understand the word. I never understood the word securitization. It took me 2 years to get to understand it.
That's right. And it would be fair to say, though, that the Law Society itself are sort of culpable as well. Because I've spoken to a load of solicitors who done a lot of conveyancing back then, and if you ask them about securitization, they still don't know what securitization is. Yet they're the ones who are legally advising you to sign this, that it's okay, and they don't understand it themselves. Surely that's a problem too.
Again, going back 7, 8 years ago, in conveyancing, most people were flipping. That's basically what you were doing. Particularly those in the commercial end were flipping properties. So the solicitors were leaving the documentation on the floors of their offices, and they were growing into mountains. They weren't perfecting them in accordance to the Registration of Deeds Act, nor were they giving people, like if you take the average couple, most wives, there's 600,000 wives in Ireland who didn't get independent legal advice, who didn't get informed consent upon what they were doing. Now, this is being upheld in the Supreme Court.
That's right.
So we have 600,000 families who were not aware of what they were doing. And the banks were taking advantage of it. The legal system were negligent and culpable in not informing them of what was going on.
That's correct. And that case that you talk about, Tom, from memory, it's Smith with a Y versus Bank of Ireland. And I remember that case because the wife, although she signed the family home declaration, she didn't get independent legal advice. And that independent legal advice was supposed to be from the husband rather than the bank. Isn't that correct?
Well, firstly, under the consent to the family home, under the 1976 Family Home Act, either partner are supposed to sit down and get the consent of the other partner before they go to the bank. And then they have to get informed consent. And it's ironic today, if I went in to get a box of Nurofen in any chemist throughout Ireland, they have to get my informed consent to buy it. I have to be aware of the consequence. Yet they were selling mortgages that they were generating 400% in certain cases, the value from thin air.
Yeah. Now, Tom, this is where we come to the crux of the problem that you and I both know, because we understand the court system. And I know, there'll be people on YouTube now saying we don't understand it and all. And there's an open invitation for them to come on and shoot the breeze here as well. My understanding is that in Ireland, you cannot sue in the name of another. You have to be the injured party. So my question to you, Tom, is how does a bank who gives a mortgage through a fractional reserve banking system of very little money they had themselves, sell it on a stock exchange for more than it was worth, and still end up an injured party in a court with locus standi? How does that happen?
Well, again, I started out 4 years ago as a lay litigant. I depleted all my finances and ended up as a lay litigant. And the very first question I put in an affidavit, which is usually a 4 or 5 page document you're informing the court of, and it's called an affidavit. I asked the plaintiff to quantify their loss. Now, the judge, of course, didn't listen to it because, after all, it was a reputable bank. And I was just one individual raising questions that would seem to have no merit, but yet in every other jurisdiction in the world, it had significant merit.
Of course.
And you move on then from that point, and of course for me, I've always been quite doubting having the name Thomas. So I started to question the legality of the banking institutions and their formation and the registration as far as their financial returns. And very quickly, I noticed that they never returned any securitized loan. So if you take the AIB, they had 22 billion euros in their loan books, but they never returned 22 billion plus back to the CRO. They falsified their accounts. And they led the shareholders and account holders and mortgage account holders to believe that they were operating legally.
And that's another issue. So now I move on from locus standi. Isn't there also a thing when in equity you must come with clean hands? So now there's no clean hands rule is what you're saying either.
Well, if a person falls and slips and they have an injury, they're entitled to claim. But you can hardly walk in off the street to a court of law and say that I have no injury, but I want to be compensated for that loss. And that's exactly what's happening in the court system in Ireland.
Yeah. So what you're saying, Tom, is that they bundle up these mortgages, they sell them on, they make a huge profit on them, and they still come into the court and say, hey, we're injured, even though we broke every regulation, every banking law known to man, and really have no standing in a courtroom.
Well, I think the greatest example is Armorn Residential Securities, which, not getting complicated, but it's a mortgage-backed security company. And all our banks, they're still doing it, by the way. Just going off track, but the people that listen to the Anglo tapes,
Yeah.
Within that recording, it said they were going to securitize the 7 billion. And not one reporter in this country, not one economist, has asked why they were securitizing 7 billion of cash. How much did they get in return? And why was this not identified? But going back to the banks coming in, Armor Residential Securities was the sister company of Nationwide Building Society. And the reason why I picked them is because obviously that loan book is being sold. Now, Nationwide securitized all their loans through Armor Residential Securities. And they got back in could be 200-300%. In every mortgage document of Nationwide Building Society, it stated that when the loan was securitized, the bank, Nationwide, transferred all its equitable and legal rights. So they couldn't come back legally according to the contract.
That's right. And I've seen a number of them contracts, and they actually say the only right that they don't sell is the borrower's right to redemption. Tom, we're going to go for an ad break here. We'll pick it up after the ad break because I know there's an awful lot of people still interested in what you have to say. I think it's only fairness. We did say we'd finish it now, but I think in fairness we let Tom continue. There's so many people in the country in trouble with this. We will talk after the break about how this can affect them and how they should maybe present this in court or to the solicitors. Join us after the break. Good evening, folks, and welcome back. Before the break, I was talking to Tom Darcy, and we were really enjoying the conversation, so we've extended it, and the whole plan of the show now has gone out the window. But anyway, we'll continue. That's how this show rolls. Tom, before the break, we were talking about the illegality, the breaking of laws within the bank. To bring it down now to a level where there's 120,000 mortgages in trouble, and that obviously leads to suicide, family breakups, and everything else. My concern is for the country is where do we go from here, Tom? First of all, we're writing saying there's no free legal aid for these people. And I was going to give you an example of a man that I met. He came down from Monaghan. I won't mention any names. He came down from Monaghan and he was a plasterer. And when I shook hands with him, he had these little hard-working hands that you knew he was just a hard-working man all his life. Now, he was in trouble with his mortgage through no fault of his own. The building died. He was a plasterer. There was nothing he could do. He had to go to court. We were trying to prepare him for court to try talk about securitization, liquidity laws being broken, saying you're regulated and licensed by the central bank, talking about locus standi, clean hands of equity. It was all over his head. Even if he understood it, he said to me, Ben, I couldn't stand up in mass and give a reading. Never mind come to a high court where everybody's wearing wigs, black gowns, they speak in a language he doesn't understand. And our government and legal system say that that is equality at arms when he comes in to defend that position. What's your view on that?
Well, unfortunately, I was that person. And through 4 years of education, I'm totally different now. But I equated it once to a judge that it was like modern day crucifixion. It is the only professional industry in Ireland where you would allow another person to imitate. And as I said to the judge, if I went outside the courts of Ireland and acted as a solicitor or a barrister, I would be charged for fraud. Yet, what you're expecting a man or a woman to go in and basically do, and I'll give a quick analogy, is to take up a scalpel and go in and operate on their children with no experience in the dark, not knowing what they're doing, while there's eminent surgeons standing around them. And that's the consequence to their failure, because once they fail in that case, which is totally stacked against them, it's constantly happening, where every right to that individual is violated. His civil rights, her constitutional rights, her European rights are ignored by our court system.
Yeah, and I believe that the Master of the High Court, in fairness to him, has highlighted that in a number of cases. I think it's AIB versus Collins from the Master, if somebody wants to read that. I think he lists out all the rights. But, you know, I have said it on several occasions too, Tom. If, let's say I'm a gurrier and I'm out drinking one night and I think it's a great idea to smash a bottle across some girl's head because she gave me a bit of cheek or whatever. The state will afford me every luxury in representation of legal counsel that I choose, and I can even change that legal counsel if I don't like them and get another one, all paid for by the taxpayer. But now we have a case where a taxpayer, through no fault of his own, is in court facing his biggest challenge, that he may be out on the street with his family, as you said, leading to suicide on many occasions, and the state say, no, you'll have no legal aid, you go in and do that operation as you said, while his taxpayers' money is paying for the gurrier down the road for his legal representation. Who does that make sense to? The Law Society say it's fair, just and right, don't they? I mean, that's what they say.
Well, the Supreme Court reiterated that policy as well, because I brought a case last February 2013 and raised Article 40 of the Constitution. We're in the Supreme Court, who are supposed to uphold the Constitution. Our own president ignored that request when I identified that I'm entitled under the Constitution to a fair trial. And yet, there's no justice, there's no fairness, there's no equality. As me, a lay litigant with no qualifications in law, and yet I'm either forced to represent my family, to protect something that was perpetrated on illegality. And just to remove the old argument of the money, this has happened before in Ireland. It happened, most people watching this won't remember it, but it happened in the Pelican House when the Eastern Health Board were giving out contaminated blood. And people went into a licensed, regulated hospital. They thought they were going to be professional. They thought they were going to uphold the laws of this country. And the consequence was people were infected and they lost their lives. No different to the couples who went out and borrowed money by a system that was already corrupted. Judge McCracken already said and has stated on record that there was collusion between the banks and local authorities, fixing planning, fixing the regulations, fixing what land catchments were going to be released, forcing the prices up. And then the banks knew they were going to get commission and handling charges and percentages and get double and triple and quadruply paid for money out of thin air. And then when it all comes crashing down because of their criminal actions, what do? We reward these people.
That's right.
We give Michael Fingleton and Sean Fitzpatrick 42 million euros in pension, while there's couples taking their lives. Families are being desecrated across this country. Throughout, I have stood over 37 suicide funerals. There is nothing more harrowing than looking at innocent children or the partner, the remaining partner, who look and go, what did we do wrong?
That's right, because like when we took a contract out with the bank, if you like, the bank looked at us and they said, he'll go to work and pay his mortgage, and that was his end in the contract, if you like. And most people, most Irish people, are from that ethic, you know, where they're good, hard-working people who want to pay their bills, right? But the bank also, you know, in a meeting of the minds, if you like, said, well, we're a bank, we're licensed, we're regulated, we'll obey and stick by the regulations. And I say, who breached the contract? And then they talk about debt forgiveness. The bank got bailed out. There was no mention of forgiveness because nothing was obviously done wrong. But then when it comes to the people, there'll be no debt forgiveness. In other words, forgiveness because you must have done something wrong. It's this trick of words within Irish society that annoys me, that comes from the top. And there is no protection in the courts, as you say, Tom. I mean, you referred to the Constitution about rights to a fair trial. It's also enshrined in the European laws. Article 6 of the European Convention on Human Rights clearly says everybody has the right to a fair trial. And as we spoke before, there is no fair trial in the Irish courts. I mean, you and I can maybe put up a fair fight now, but we are far and few between. And as I talked about the Plaster or many other people, the length and breadth of this country, don't know what even they're talking about, don't know what happened, and they believe the media hype. Well, you got the money. Now, we refer to a certain judge in the High Court. I won't mention him. It's the commercial courts. And that's his favourite saying. When you raise any of these issues, his saying is, you got the money. How would you address that, Tom?
Well, unfortunately, I've been in the High Court 37 times and the Supreme Court 7 times.
And you were successful, Tom?
In the end, yes.
In the end, that's important to say, though.
But I have to say that the banks once again are coming back after me, and they want to waste another 1.2x million of taxpayers' money, to which they've never even spoken to me. But going back to your point, just to sum this up, the taxpayers went in and borrowed money. Again, they thought it was by a licensed regulated entity, which it wasn't. Through no fault of their own, the banks acted criminally, and the banks sold that on, got back money that is not identified in their financial records, which is another criminal act. And then the taxpayers bail the banks out, paying back that loan again, and then they bring the borrower to court who done nothing wrong. Absolutely nothing wrong. Broke no laws.
Yeah.
But they're being brought to court by the people who broke the laws.
And Tom, I know we don't have too much time because I'm going to have to get you back on the show. I just know there's going to be a request to have you back on, because we also need to talk about the 2013 Land and Conveyancing Act. We have to talk about how that came into power and who signed it in. And basically what that was, am I right in saying it, and we'll probably have to finish on this, I'm right in saying that this was a law that came from Europe that forced our government basically to say, look, we cannot screw enough of the people that bailed us out in the first place. Change your laws to make it easier to evict the very people that bailed us out in the first place. Has the lunatics taken over the asylum?
Well, I would have to question the word representation when you look at our government, when you look at our TDs. The Land and Conveyancing Law Reform Bill, to which I've taken a constitutional challenge against, is a retroactive law. Yeah. It was retroactively put back in time to facilitate the banking institution. The one appalling factor is that over 90 TDs who say they represent the people voted in favour of evicting innocent mothers and children from their homes. And again, not one mention in the Irish mainstream media.
Tom, I'm going to have to leave it there. I know a lot of people will want you back on the show. There's so much we still haven't covered. We talked about illegality, locus standi, time travel even within the law, fairness, equal rights, right to fair trial, all being quashed. I really think we need to pick this up in another show. Tom, I want to thank you for coming on the show. We'll take a break. We'll be back in a few moments.
Thank you very much.
Welcome back, folks. There, a very interesting talk with Tom Darcy. I hope you enjoyed that. Later on the programme, as promised, we will have Joe Patterson from the Business Union of Ireland, Rates Union of Ireland. But first I want to talk to Jerry Beads. Jerry Beads is a founder of the new Land League, Jerry. Is that what it is?
Well, that's what it's been called, and to get back to, or go back in our history to when the country last faced some similar position that it's in now with all the evictions coming down the line. So we're going back to 1880 to at the start of the Land League.
And of course, the Land League was set up by Parnell, I believe, a good old hero of yours. Jerry, I see you have a leaflet there. You've given me one too about a quote he gave from speaking in Ennis in September 1880. Would you like just to, because I think it emanates for today again, as you say, history repeating itself?
Yeah, well, I mean, basically, Parnell was referred to as the uncrowned King of Ireland, and in 1880, people were facing evictions. There had been a few bad years, and the harvest had failed or whatever else, and people couldn't pay their rents, and the landlords at the time were evicting them and burning the roofs off the cottages and to keep them out of them. And they formed the Land League, and Parnell made a famous speech. And boycott also came out of that period. The word that's now well known in the English language came out of Ireland. So Parnell, in this famous speech, said, when a man takes a farm from which another has been evicted, you should shun him on the roadside when you meet him. You should shun him on the street of the town. You should shun him in the shop. You should shun him in the fair green and in the marketplace, and even in a place of worship, by leaving him alone and putting him in a moral Coventry. By isolating him from the rest of his country as if he were a leper of old, you must show your disdain for the crime of the crime he has committed.
Well, that's strong words there from Parnell. He didn't hold his punches. But in Irish history, there is a huge, if you like, abhorrence to evictions. But I think more so now because, as we heard from Tom Darcy, it really is a banking problem. It was caused by bankers, and now the bankers want to evict. So probably really a need for the Land League again now to be reformed.
Well, this is really what has come about, and it's the people have been demanding the setting up of the Land League as such. I mean, this has been going on since last summer when we used this slogan last year after the All Stops auction to highlight the issues, and really the whole problem is that banks won't talk to people and are not talking, and now it has changed around because they're selling all these loans off at discounted rates to vulture funds, basically debt collectors. And these guys are being hailed as heroes by our current government. They're in and out of the Taoiseach's department, their finance minister's meeting, and these guys that some of them are being called hedge funds, they're debt collectors who are buying up these loans and are going to pursue people to the end of the earth to recover their money.
They seem like vultures nearly waiting on the carcass of the Irish people, waiting to see what meat is left on the bone. Sometimes they're buying these at 10%. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, these are the sort of things that they're buying them for 10%. The figures are not being revealed, but there's different ways of, different banks' accounts it's showing up, etc. So the general consensus is that, I mean, we're seeing people talking to us who have receivers and have liquidators in and whatever, so they know what their property's been sold for. So we're seeing some of these loans 20 million owed, and they're being sold for $1 million and $2 million. And like hotels are being sold, 19, 20 million owed on them, and they're being sold for 2 million. And then we're reading in the papers, these were sold for 8 and 10 million. It's all nonsense.
Yeah.
And
not only that though, Jerry, the real crime, I suppose, in all of this is, apart from the bank creating the mess, is, am I right in saying that deal that they're giving these vultures, as we call them, the deal is not being given to the owner themselves. That deal is not being offered to them, notwithstanding that they are the very people who bailed the bank out in the first place.
Yeah, well, I think, that the first real sign for the Irish people this was going on was in the Anglo loans. Like, this has been going on for the last year or two quietly. You've had one of the banks sold 1,500 apartments for 30,000 a pop to one of these funds, and you have a situation where in the Anglo loans and the Irish nationwide loans, it came public and ended up in front of the Dáil committees, where there was 13,000 loans being sold by the liquidators of Anglo, and the row started over because they're not going to have to comply with central bank rules and guidelines anymore. Because there was such an outcry in February and March there, they've now said they will sign up to it, and they will. But there's no legally binding requirements on them to do anything. And so Irish people have really started to wake up. So we've noticed that we were having meetings about how to establish the Land League, had been going on for kind of months, and suddenly people said, let's get this going. So next Sunday is the launch day. Next Monday.
Next Monday is the launch day. What date is that, Jerry?
It's Bank Holiday Monday, Easter Monday.
Oh, Easter Monday, yeah, that's great.
And
where is that taking place, Jerry? And
it's taking place in Toher's Restaurant and Convention Centre between Naas and Newbridge.
In Naas and Newbridge.
Which is on off the N7, junction 10 on the N7. You turn off and head for Newbridge. And
what time is that, Jerry?
At 3 o'clock.
3 o'clock, okay. And tell me this, what does the Land League hope to achieve? What is there plans yet for it, or is it basically gather the numbers first?
Well, basically the original Land League had 4 goals. So we've tried to reconstitute and bring it back to the same principles. So
now don't be afraid to put on your glasses there, Jerry.
No, well, it's actually actually not too bad. Basically, to be a voice, the Land League is reformed, and it's to be a voice for all the people. Number 1, to restore the rule of law. Number 2, to resolve outdated morals and commercial practices, commercial rates. I'm not going to start reading, it was too long, I'll just keep the headlines.
The main points.
Number 3 is to reclaim our national resources, oil, gas, water, fisheries and more. And to recover our national resources, assets from the vulture funds and the corporations reclaiming our and reclaim our national media and identity. 4, to solve the banking problem with a comprehensive national and recognised public banking service, to incorporate the post office, credit unions, and to socialise the benefit of banking instead of nationalising bank debt, and to tackle odious debt and demand debit-free money. There's been a campaign to set up public banking and whatever else, and we really need to go back to what was done at the foundation of the state, where the ACC was set up, which was the Agricultural Credit Corporation, and the ICC, the Industrial Credit Corporation, were set up by the first governments, and basically to lend money to farming and industry to get the state going. To get the country going again. And we actually need to see this happening again. Yeah.
Jerry, I know that you brought in the Land and Conveyancing Act of 2009. I think there was a section or two you wanted just to highlight before you go in that. I think it was the last section of it. Is it 133?
Section 133, yeah. I mean, basically the Land and Conveyancing Bill was probably the worst piece of drafted legislation in the history of the state, brought in 2009. And this gave rise to the Judge Dunn ruling, which stopped all repossessions. But basically the legislation was brought in because we have now gone to e-registering with land registry, and when you now register land, its coordinates, GPS coordinates, are now used for marking out the land. It's brought it into a modern era. So they had to update the law. So they brought in this legislation to basically abolish legislation that was going back to the 18th century and 1926 and 1954 and 64 acts and whatever. So it basically abolished all previous acts, and then for various issues set forward, going forward we shall do this. And the Judge Dunn ruled that basically they had abolished the previous requirements and hadn't replaced them. So that created the Judge Dunn ruling. And they then
one section in it now you're interested in, it's to do with the powers of the sheriff.
Yeah, section 133, and I'll have to put my glasses on because the letters are small in this.
Small print, folks.
The powers of the sheriff or other person entitled to exercise the sheriff's powers to seize a tenancy under a writ of fereficia or other process of execution is abolished. Straightforward, abolished. Except in relation to a tenancy of land which is wholly or partly for the purpose of carrying on a business. So basically, any private residency is deemed, the sheriff's powers are abolished.
Okay, well, there you go, folks. The powers of the sheriff are abolished. That'll need further discussion. Jerry, I want to thank you for joining us on the show. We'll be right back after the break with Joe Patterson from the Irish Business Union of Ireland. I think I have that correct. We'll correct it after the break if not. Thank you. Welcome back, folks. And as promised, we have Joe Patterson here from the Irish Retail Business Union of Ireland. He's going to kill me because I got that name wrong before the break. Joe was on an RTE programme, Life and Debt, and it could have been life and death, of businesses. Joe, 2 years on after the show, has things improved in business?
No, things have got much worse, Ben. And I laugh every evening I listen to the news about this upsurge in business and green shoots of recovery, and business is on the floor. Simple as that.
And tell me this, Joe, you're in an industrial estate there in Trim. Surely there are some signs in an industrial unit?
The signs, Ben, are that most of them are lying vacant. And you go down the town then, and a lot of the shops are now barber shops and takeaways and what have you. And we have a multinational on the edge of the town, and we, I believe, have another one coming into the town, which may improve business or may kill it off completely. That remains to be seen.
It'll be very hard for the small units to survive with big multinationals on the outskirts of town. I believe they're not paying for parking or anything like that, but if you come into the town, you've got to pay for parking. In a small town like Trim, that's going to make a huge difference.
Well, it is a policy of, it would appear, of the councils to collect all the rates in one area, which it makes it handier for them, which gives them the money to keep the inefficiencies going and the pensions and the big salaries and the whole lot at the expense of all the small businesses.
And Joe, you set up the Business Retail Union of Ireland. What is the goal of that? I know it's not fully set up yet and you're working on it, hoping to launch soon, but basically what is the goal of that?
Well, Ben, business people tend to concentrate on work, and it's only when it's too late that they discover that the rug has been pulled out from under them. So what we were trying to do was to get people together to get a voice, because it would appear that we have no voice whatsoever,
Yeah.
And just to give you an idea, when you were saying there about the multinationals on the outskirts of the town, if you have just take, we'll say, one of the multinational supermarkets, and then you have, we'll say, a filling station and an industrial unit, 3 different businesses. Now, both of the other businesses are cash business because I cash turnover.
Of course.
And the industrial unit might be a service company or something, we say, working for the construction industry, where you're paid supposedly after 30 days, but it could go to 90 days.
Mm-hmm.
And you're paying the same, or expected to pay the same per square foot rate as the rest of them. So in other words, a company taking in €60 a day, a company taking in €60,000 a day, doesn't make any difference. It's the same square foot. And then the retailer in the town has a couple of traffic wardens walking up and down, trying to
the customers.
Getting rid of the customers.
Yeah.
And where are they going to go? Up to the multinational.
Yeah.
So
there's justice and fairness within the business rates.
There's
Now,
absolutely
in fairness,
none.
it's a very old law. I think it goes back to 180 splash. It's
Yes,
the old
correct.
Poor's Act or something like that.
The poor law, actually. It's going back to the 1800s, which, the government changes rules and does U-turns on a weekly basis. And we're asking them to make a U-turn on the commercial rates for a fairer system. Now, bearing in mind that the business community are the only ones expected to pay rates. So, in other words, are we the only one on the roads? They tell you that it's for the upkeep of the roads, but in actual fact it is to pay the wages and the pensions of a overburdened local government, which we were promised by Phil Hogan that he would reform. Now, you have to bear in mind that county manager are getting from roughly 175,000 per year down to 140,000, with directors of services then getting from 80,000 to 100,000. Now, we're calling for an investigation by the government as to, they sent out the estimate for 2014, and one of the most amusing figures on it was approximately 9 million for miscellaneous services. Now, if you bring your car off to get it serviced, and you come along and there's miscellaneous on the bottom of it, will you pay for it? I don't think so,
Not at a huge price.
No. It's what's going on in local government is absolutely criminal and needs an immediate investigation as to we're not talking now here about the frontline services. We're talking about all these fancy names and titles that they create for themselves with massive salaries and massive pensions while they're closing down business. If they want to close down business, come out and tell us, and we'll close down.
Yeah.
End of story. Don't be giving us a long, painful debt.
Yeah,
You know.
and that's right. And I see small to medium enterprises like yourselves are going to be the entrepreneurs that brought the country to a good standing in Europe, and also they're going to be the lifeblood that'll get us out of any depression we may be in. But yet they seem to be hindering it. You asked me to take a trip out to your business unit, which I did during the week. And on the way in, I was astounded by the number of units closed. There was one unit open as we drove in. The rest of them were closed all the way down till we got to your unit. Now, in the good times, I suppose there was footfall. A lot of these units were open. They've been driven out of there through banking crisis and rates. You're still now paying the same amount of rates you paid in the good time when there was footfall. And really, you're at the end of an industrial estate, sitting dead with no footfall at all, still expected to pay the same rates. Isn't that right?
That's correct, Ben. But the situation is that we have numerous, they have completely lost track of the planning and the enforcement system. Now, I asked a simple question in 2006 regarding a planning decision, and I was told that they would sort it out. 49 people later from Meath County Council, and 8 years later, they now are taking action on that. So we're talking about 8 years down the line. There are businesses with no planning permission, and they're collecting commercial rates from these businesses. There are parks, which are business parks, which have turned in overnight to retail parks. They seem to have lost a handle on it. The only thing it is about money and self-preservation. Simple as that.
Right.
You know.
And it would be fair to say that your industrial estate in Trim, from my driving around the country, seems to be echoed. I mean, it's not just for Trim. I mean, this has echoed the length and breadth of the country with small
Absolutely.
businesses.
Yeah.
And remember, the business community, when they actually pull out of these units, they're entitled to nothing.
Correct.
You know, they
Yeah.
don't have a wage every week. They have to make sure there's a wage for the employees every week.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's fair to say that there's no wage even for you while you try to pay all these
Correct,
bills.
correct. You see, we have a complete two-tier system, in the sense that if I go to do a job, I have to be very competitive. I have to do it to a very high standard, and I have to take the least amount of money for it. And if I break something, I have to fix it. The councils get an endless supply of money. If they break something, they buy a new one. It takes them 10 people to do one person's work. Basically, what we have done over the last decades is we've created monsters, which is the councils and the like, where we put in people that didn't need to be there as a gift because they were foot soldiers of the political parties. We then come along and basically what it's like, Ben, we fed them during the Celtic Tiger, and now we can no longer feed them, but we can't get rid of them. We have a situation there where the government would appear to get up in the morning like somebody that has a car with 12 holes in the petrol tank, and to try and figure out a way, how are we going to get more money to buy more petrol
Instead of
while,
fixing the
while
hole.
it's coming out in 10 or 12 different directions. And there seems to be no business brain whatsoever in government. And what you were saying there, that the business community are expected to pull us out of this recession, I can tell you here and now from the people I meet on a daily basis, they will never ever employ anybody again. And that's a sad fact of life. So is it going to be the unions that's going to employ these people? Are we all going to work for the council or the OPW or whatever? The government needs to get a grip and sort things out as promised. That's why we voted for them in the last election.
Yeah. It also seems to me that the rates in these places are stifling any new business or growth.
Correct.
Because as you say, why in God's name would anybody take on one of these units now? Because you're going to be stifled by a crippling rates crisis within these places, that whatever profit you may have or may expect to have where there's no footfall, you're going to be hit with rates the minute you walk in the door. And they can't give a break on that because that's unfair to you down at the end of the lot as well.
Well, they did bring in an initiative there which was typical what you would expect from the government, utterly stupid. And that was, if you're starting a business, to give you free rates for a while, which in turn had a knock-on effect to your neighbour. You were competing against your neighbour, and now he can no longer compete. You see, the whole financial system, Ben, the biggest drug of all time is money. Now, if you were to come along and remove all the drugs off the streets of Dublin, you'd have anarchy in a week. But we've removed overnight all the money that's in the community. Now, bear in mind that They're talking about a building boom. There's no building boom, and we know that. There is a situation out there where builders have no money to build houses. They're building them at cost price, and they're talking about them going up 20%. They're still below cost price. The builder can't get money, and in turn, I can't get money, and in turn, my workers can't get money, and in turn, the shops can't get money. So, and the most annoying part of the whole lot was our famous minister, Mr. Noonan, making the statement that he reckoned that Morgan Kelly had to be respected, that he got it right the last time, and he has to be listened to. And I think that he should contact the central bank. Now, that was a very short time after Morgan Kelly made the statement. We've been making the same statement for the last 4 years, and he won't listen.
Nobody's listening. Folks, that's Joe, and we will put his website up on after the show. If you want more details and you're in business, perhaps we could get a strong group going for Joe to tackle the rates. All they're looking for is a fair crack at the whip.
Sorry, Ben.
And to try get business going. What I will do is I want to thank all the guests we had on the show today, and at the end of the show, a lot of people may not know that I'm actually very friendly with Michael Noonan, and I did a Skype call, and we hope to do a Skype call maybe every show with Michael Noonan, and I'll play the Skype call. We did it earlier today. The first question I asked Michael Noonan is, did he tell his friends Enda Kenny and Radcar in the cabinet that we were friends?
Now, Ben, you know yourself, I couldn't be telling the boys everything we be talking about. I don't even tell them we be talking in the first place now, you know yourself. Now, quick question, Ben. This is strictly off the record now, isn't it?
Of course, Michael. It's always off the record when I talk to you. I did promise you that. Michael, tell me this. In direct democracy, what do you think about allowing the people decide stuff by referendum?
I'm going to tell you something now, Ben, and this is strictly off the record as we've agreed, okay?
Yeah.
Now, but you couldn't be giving them the power to decide things for themselves. That's why we have government. You know yourself, Ben. They should one half of them there, they're not fit to decide left or right. You have the other half there, Ben, now in fairness. And sure, they couldn't add 1 and 1. And then sure, the other half, Ben. They're about emigrated away in America and they're in Australia and all these places.
Michael, that's 3 halves.
Oh, yes. Apologies, man. I'm not too good at the count myself, and I don't know how I got the job for Minister for Finance in the first place.
Michael, I'll have to leave it there. I'll give you a call on next week, and hopefully we'll get further into policies that you may have.
Come on, man. We're on the phone now. Let's have a good old chat about a lot of things. Come on. Sock it to me.
Right, well, what sort of policies have you got, say, on finance to get us out of the doldrums?
Well, hopefully now, Ben, at the end of the day, we're finished up with the trike, and, you know, the only answer is more taxation. At the end of the day, tax the out of them, you know what I mean? Because, like, you know what I'm saying? They'll give out about it for a day or two and everything else, but sure, like, at the end of the day, should they take it laying down anyway?
That's it.
So
we're
going to keep going on. We're going to keep battering on with the taxation anyway.
Yeah,
anyway.
Because they've bad memories, and you can blame everything on Labour.
Well, sure, you know yourself. After record, strictly speaking and all that, sure, you know yourself. We've always them to dump all the shite on, you know.
So it's dump it on Gilmore and let Gilroy go free for a while at least.
Well, please God, you know yourself. Well, Gilmore, he's an awful idiot too, you know yourself. What do you do? See, he had to be pulled into the job to get us over the line, to get us into government in the first place, you know. But he's there. He's getting a wage out of it, and he'll get his pension, sure he'll be dead on, you know.
All right, Michael. Well, look, I'll call you next week, and I'll talk to you then.
Do Ben. Listen, say hello to all the family for me, and I'll be down around Navan sometime next week. So you never know, we might go for an old pint or something like that.
Fair play. Thanks to you, Michael. Talk to you then.
No, lovely talking to you, Ben. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you now. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.